Let's move on to subtracting polynomials. You will need to distribute, okay? When you have two polynomials, so I have one polynomial here, and I have another polynomial there, but the difference is I have a negative right here in the middle instead of a plus sign. I can't just go ahead and combine things like I did when I was adding. I'm subtracting all of this polynomial, okay? This whole polynomial is getting subtracted, not just the 3x to the third power, the whole thing. Okay, so what that means is this is really a negative 1. If there's no number there, it's a 1. So I need to take this negative 1 and I need to multiply it. So I need to distribute it to all three terms. Okay? When I do that, negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Negative 1 times positive 8 gives me negative 8x. Negative 1 times positive 10 gives me negative 10. I want you to take a second and I want you to look and see what happened with the sign in front of these numbers and how did it change here. So hopefully you saw that the signs just become the opposite. This was a positive 8 and it became a negative 8. This was a positive 10 and it became a negative 10. So when you do this, you have to make these have the opposite sign. Okay, you have to do that first and then you can combine like terms. So I'm going to bring down my other polynomial here. Now that I have distributed the negative 1 or I've made those signs opposite of what they were, I can now combine like terms. So the first step, the last polynomial needs opposite signs. The second step is combining like terms. Okay, so just like in the other problem, I'm going to start with my first term on the left side, which is a positive 6x to the third power. So I'm going to look for another x that has a little 3. I look through it, and I have this one. And I take the sign with it, which is a negative 3. So the math I'm doing is 6 minus 3. So I'm going to do 6 minus 3, which gives me positive 3. So I'm going to write that down. And they both have an x cubed, so I'm going to write the x cubed. Then I look at my next term, and I take the sign in front. It's a positive 4x. It's just an x all by itself, so I look for another number that just has an x. And I have one right here. I take the sign with, so it's a negative 8. So I'm doing 4 minus 8. So 4 minus 8. Again, if I need to, I can do that in the calculator. 4 minus 8. And I get negative 4. And because it's negative, I have to put a minus 4 right here. And they both had an x, so I put an x on it. And then last, I have a number without any letter on it. So I need to look for another number without a letter, and I have this one. They're both negative, so I have to do negative 9 minus 10. So negative 9 minus 10 in my calculator. Negative 9 minus 10. I hit enter. And I get negative 19. So I put negative 19 right here. And I look. This is an x with a little 3. This is just an x, and this doesn't have a letter. So there's nothing I can combine, so this is my final answer. All right. Do me a favor, why don't you pause the video? I want you to try the next problem on your own, and then restart the video when you're done so you can see if you did it right. So go ahead and pause the video. All right, so now that you've tried the problem on your own, we're going to go through it together and make sure we did it correctly. Okay. So what I notice, where I need to look first from now on when I see my problems, is right here. There is a minus, which means I can't just combine like terms. I have to follow the steps up here. My first step is that the last polynomial, this polynomial right here, that polynomial needs opposite signs. Okay? Or you can think of it like multiplying this all by -1. Whatever works for you to remember, but it creates opposite signs. So what happens is this is no longer a +7, it becomes a -7y squared. This is no longer going to be a -19. The opposite of a negative is a positive, so it becomes a +19y, and that's because -1 times -19, two negatives make a positive. And then I have +11. The opposite of plus is minus, so I'm going to do -11. Again, that's because a negative times a positive is a negative. And then I just copy down my first polynomial, which is y squared plus 11. Now I can do step 2 and combine like terms. My first term has a y squared. So I look for another number that has a y squared, and I see -7y squared. So I'm going to do 8 minus 7. So 8 minus 7 gives me +1. So I have a +y squared or 1y squared, however you want to write it. You do not need that 1 in front if you don't want it. Then I look at my next term. It is a number without a letter, so I look for another number without a letter, and I have -11. So I'm taking +11 and I'm subtracting 11. So 11 minus 11 is 0. Since it's 0, I don't need to write anything. These just go away. The only term I'm left with is this +19y. So y all by itself, it doesn't have a little number. But if I look, there's no other term that just has y. So I just tag that answer on my end. So I put a +19y. And that is my answer.